I never thought revenge would be served in a mahogany-paneled boardroom with fresh orchids and artisanal coffee. But there I was, staring across the polished conference table at Patricia Richardson, my ex-fiancé's mother, as she calmly announced that my entire department would be eliminated effective immediately. The woman who once told me I'd never be good enough for her son was now my company's board chairman, and she was about to destroy everything I'd built with a single vote. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Sarah Chen, and 6 months ago, I thought I was living my dream life. At 29, I was the Director of Digital Marketing and Innovation at Horizon Marketing Solutions, one of Austin's fastest-growing marketing agencies. I had built something extraordinary from the ground up, a 12-person team that had revolutionized how our company approached digital strategy for tech clients. We called ourselves the Digital Innovation Hub, and in just 2 years we had transformed from a small experimental division into the company's crown jewel. The morning of the board meeting started like any other Tuesday in Austin. The October air carried that perfect Texas autumn crispness that made you grateful to be alive. I arrived at our domain offices early, clutching my usual oat milk latte from Café Luna, the little spot around the corner where I did my best thinking. The building hummed with that familiar energy of people passionate about their work, and as I walked through our open concept 4th floor, I felt that surge of pride I always experienced when I saw my team in action. Jessica Martinez, my senior marketing analyst and closest friend at work, was already deep in conversation with David Kim, our creative director, about a campaign for one of our biggest tech clients. Rachel Thompson, our social media manager, was reviewing analytics on her dual monitors, her brow furrowed in concentration. These weren't just employees. They were brilliant minds who had chosen to follow my vision, and together we had created something remarkable. The email from Bob Walsh, our CEO, had arrived the previous Friday afternoon with a subject line that every executive both craves and fears: "Special board meeting, your presence requested." The message was brief but loaded with significance. The board wanted to discuss the future of our department structure, and as the head of our most innovative division, my input was crucial. Bob's tone suggested this was an opportunity, not a threat. After all, my department had generated over $8 million in new business the previous year, increased client retention by 35%, and won 3 industry awards for campaign innovation. Our proprietary analytics platform, MarketPulse, had become the secret weapon that set Horizon apart from every other mid-sized agency in Texas. I had conceptualized it, managed its development, and overseen its implementation. Clients were specifically requesting to work with us because of the insights and targeting capabilities it provided. We weren't just another marketing agency anymore. We were technology innovators, and that transformation had my fingerprints all over it. As I prepared for the meeting, I couldn't help but feel optimistic. The timing seemed perfect for expansion. Maybe they wanted to discuss growing the Digital Innovation Hub, or perhaps they were considering making me a VP. At 29, I would be the youngest vice president in Horizon's history, but the numbers supported it. My team's success wasn't just impressive, it was undeniable. I had spent the weekend preparing a presentation that outlined our achievements, our current projects, and a strategic vision for the next 3 years. The slides were polished, the data was compelling, and the growth projections were conservative but exciting. We could double our impact within 18 months if given the right resources and support. The boardroom on the 6th floor was Horizon's crown jewel, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Austin, a massive oak table that could seat 20, and original artwork from local artists that Bob's wife had personally selected. The morning light streamed through those windows, casting everything in a golden glow that felt almost cinematic. Fresh white orchids sat in crystal vases at strategic points around the room, and someone had arranged for the good coffee, the kind from that boutique roaster in South Austin that cost more per pound than most people spent on groceries in a week. As I entered the boardroom, my confidence was quiet but solid. I wore my favorite navy blazer, the one that made me feel powerful and professional, paired with a crisp white shirt and my grandmother's pearl earrings for luck. My presentation materials were organized in a leather portfolio that had been a gift from my mentor during my MBA program at Northwestern. Everything about this moment felt significant. like a culmination of years of hard work and strategic thinking. Bob Walsh was already there, of course, looking slightly nervous in the way he always did before important meetings. Linda Foster, our COO, gave me a warm smile that seemed genuine. Mark Stevens, the CFO, was absorbed in his laptop screen, probably reviewing financial projections one final time. The familiar faces around the table felt reassuring. These were people who knew my work, who had seen the results my team delivered month after month. But then Patricia Richardson walked in, and the entire energy of the room shifted like a cold front moving through Central Texas. I hadn't seen Patricia since the night Michael and I ended our engagement 8 months earlier. She looked exactly as I remembered. Perfectly coiffed silver hair, designer suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary, and that particular expression of polite disdain she had perfected over decades of looking down on people she considered beneath her social standing. At 58, Patricia Richardson commanded attention simply by existing in a space, and she knew it. Patricia had joined Horizon as an investor 6 months prior, contributing $5 million that had allowed the company to expand into new markets and upgrade our technology infrastructure. Her background as the former CEO of a regional retail chain had impressed the existing board members, and her financial commitment had earned her significant influence almost immediately. What I hadn't realized until this moment was just how much influence she had accumulated. As she took her seat at the head of the table, a position that had traditionally belonged to Bob during board meetings, I felt a flutter of unease. Patricia's investment had been positioned as a partnership opportunity, a chance for Horizon to scale, with the guidance of an experienced executive. But sitting there in what was clearly the power position, she looked less like a collaborative partner, and more like someone who had simply purchased control. Our eyes met briefly across the polished mahogany surface, and for just a moment, I saw something flicker in her expression. It wasn't surprise at seeing me, she had known I would be here. It was something else entirely, something that made my stomach tighten with a recognition I couldn't quite name yet. The woman who had once told Michael that I was too ambitious for my own good, and not the kind of woman who builds a proper family, was now sitting in judgment of my professional life. The woman who had made it clear during every family dinner and holiday gathering that I would never be good enough for her son was now in a position to determine my career trajectory. But I pushed those thoughts aside as Bob called the meeting to order. This was business, not personal. Patricia might have disapproved of me as a potential daughter-in-law, but she was supposedly a savvy businesswoman who would recognize value when she saw it. My department's performance spoke for itself. The numbers didn't lie, and neither did the industry recognition we had earned. As Bob began speaking about the company's growth trajectory and future vision, I felt that familiar surge of excitement that came with being part of something bigger than myself. Horizon wasn't just my workplace. It was the canvas where I had painted my professional masterpiece. My team, my innovations, my strategic vision had helped transform this company from a regional player into a formidable competitor in the digital marketing space. I was ready to present our case, ready to show the board exactly why the Digital Innovation Hub wasn't just valuable to Horizon's future, it was essential. The data was on my side, the track record was undeniable, and the vision for growth was both ambitious and achievable. What I wasn't ready for was the realization that this meeting had never been about recognizing my contributions or expanding my department's role. As Patricia's lips curved into what might have been a smile if it had contained any warmth whatsoever, I began to understand that I wasn't here as a valued executive presenting a business case. I was here as a target, and Patricia Richardson had been planning this moment since the day she wrote her first check to Horizon Marketing Solutions. The woman who had made it clear that I wasn't good enough for her family was about to show me that I wasn't good enough for my career either. The morning light continued streaming through those floor-to-ceiling windows, the orchids remained perfectly arranged, and the expensive coffee still smelled rich and inviting. But something fundamental had shifted in that boardroom, and I could feel the weight of what was coming settling over me like storm clouds gathering over Ladybird Lake. This wasn't going to be the celebration I had imagined. This was going to be something else entirely, and Patricia Richardson was just getting started. Bob Walsh cleared his throat and stood at the head of the table, though Patricia's presence somehow made his usual commanding position feel diminished. He held a leather-bound folder that I recognized as the quarterly performance reports, the documents that detailed every department's contributions to Horizon's success. My heart rate quickened slightly as I realized this meeting would likely involve a detailed review of our achievements. "Ladies and gentlemen," Bob began, his voice carrying that practiced confidence of someone who had delivered countless presentations to investors and clients, "we're here today to discuss the future of Horizon Marketing Solutions and to recognize the incredible transformation our company has undergone over the past 2 years." I felt a warmth spread through my chest. This was exactly what I had hoped for: acknowledgement of the changes we had implemented, the innovations we had brought to market, the way we had repositioned Horizon from a traditional agency into a technology-forward marketing powerhouse. My fingers traced the edge of my presentation folder, ready to contribute to what promised to be a celebration of our collective success. Patricia sat perfectly still, her manicured hands folded on the table, her expression unreadable. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She wore a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and her silver hair was styled in that effortless way that actually required significant effort and expense to achieve. Everything about her projected authority and control, from her posture to the way she seemed to own whatever space she occupied. Bob continued, consulting his notes with the kind of theatrical precision that suggested he had rehearsed this presentation. "When I look at our performance metrics from 24 months ago, and compare them to where we stand today, the transformation is nothing short of remarkable. We've gone from a regional marketing agency struggling to differentiate ourselves in a crowded marketplace to a recognized leader in digital innovation for B2B technology companies." Linda Foster nodded approvingly, and Mark Stevens looked up from his laptop screen with what appeared to be genuine interest. These were my colleagues, people who had watched my team work late nights and weekends to develop strategies that had attracted national attention. They knew the story behind our success because they had lived it alongside us. "Our client retention rate has improved dramatically," Bob said, pulling out a chart that I recognized from my own quarterly reports. "We've increased our average contract value, expanded our service offerings, and most importantly, we've established Horizon as an innovative force in the marketing technology space." I allowed myself a small smile. These were the metrics I had been tracking obsessively for 2 years, the numbers that proved our strategic pivot had been not just successful but transformational. Every late night spent refining algorithms for Market Pulse, every weekend devoted to analyzing competitor strategies, every presentation delivered to skeptical clients had contributed to this moment of recognition. Mark Stevens leaned forward, his natural affinity for data evident in his expression. "The revenue growth has been particularly impressive. Our new business development has exceeded projections for 8 consecutive quarters, and our profit margins have improved significantly due to the efficiency gains from our proprietary technology platform." Bob nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly, Mark, and that brings us to the heart of today's discussion. This transformation didn't happen by accident. It required vision, dedication, and frankly, a willingness to take risks that many traditional agencies wouldn't have considered." Patricia spoke for the first time since the meeting began, her voice smooth and controlled in the way that suggested years of boardroom experience. "Risk assessment is indeed crucial in any business transformation. The question we must ask ourselves is whether the risks we've taken have been prudent, and whether the structure we've created is sustainable for long-term growth." There was something in her tone that made me shift slightly in my chair. It wasn't overtly negative, but there was an undertone that suggested she viewed our innovations with skepticism rather than appreciation. I reminded myself that Patricia came from a retail background, where digital transformation had been slower and more cautious than in the marketing industry. Perhaps she simply needed time to understand the value proposition. Bob seemed to interpret her comment as an invitation to delve deeper into our success story. "That's an excellent point, Patricia. Let me walk you through the specific initiatives that have driven our growth, because I think you'll find that our approach has been both innovative and strategically sound." He moved to the presentation screen at the far end of the room and began displaying slides that I had helped prepare over the past 2 years. The first showed our client portfolio expansion, with logos of major tech companies that had never worked with agencies of our size before our digital transformation. Names like Cloud Tech Solutions, Dataflow Industries, and NextGen Analytics filled the screen. Companies with annual revenues in the hundreds of millions who had chosen Horizon over larger, more established agencies. These aren't just clients, Bob explained, gesturing toward the screen. These are strategic partnerships that have elevated our entire industry position. 2 years ago, we couldn't compete for contracts of this magnitude. Today, we're not just competing, we're winning. I felt that familiar surge of pride as I watched him present our achievements. Every logo on that screen represented months of relationship building, strategic thinking, and flawless execution. I remembered the late-night strategy sessions with Jessica and David, the countless revisions to campaign proposals, the nerve-wracking presentations, where we had to prove that a mid-sized Austin agency could deliver results that matched or exceeded what the big multinational firms offered. The next slide showed our award recognition, 3 industry awards in 18 months, including the prestigious Digital Innovation Award from the American Marketing Association. I had accepted that award on behalf of our team at a ceremony in Chicago, standing on a stage in front of industry leaders from across the country as they recognized Horizon's contribution to advancing marketing technology. Industry recognition is valuable, Patricia said, her tone carefully neutral, but awards don't always translate to sustainable business practices. What matters is whether our growth model can be replicated and scaled without excessive dependence on individual contributors. I felt a slight chill at her words, though I couldn't immediately identify why. She was speaking in business terms that sounded reasonable on the surface, but there was something beneath them that felt personal. The phrase, excessive dependence on individual contributors, seemed pointed, though Bob didn't appear to notice the subtle dig. Linda Foster jumped in with her characteristic enthusiasm for company achievements. I think what's particularly impressive is how we've managed to maintain our company culture while scaling so rapidly. The team cohesion and collaborative spirit that made Horizon special hasn't been lost in the growth process. Bob nodded vigorously. Absolutely, Linda. And that brings us to perhaps the most significant factor in our transformation, the development of our proprietary technology platform, MarketPulse. My pulse quickened as he prepared to discuss the innovation that had become my professional signature. MarketPulse wasn't just a tool we used for client campaigns. It was a revolutionary approach to marketing analytics that had attracted attention from competitors and industry publications alike. The platform combined artificial intelligence, predictive modeling, and real-time data analysis in ways that had never been attempted by an agency of our size. MarketPulse has become our competitive differentiator, Bob continued, displaying metrics that showed the platform's impact on campaign performance. Client campaigns utilizing our platform have shown an average of 43% better performance than industry benchmarks. We're not just meeting expectations. We're redefining what's possible in digital marketing. The slide showed case studies that I could recite from memory. A software startup that had increased their qualified leads by 200% using our targeting algorithms. A B2B technology company that had shortened their sales cycle by 30% through our lead scoring methodology. A cybersecurity firm that had expanded into 3 new markets using insights generated by our platform. Each success story represented months of my life, countless hours spent refining algorithms, testing hypotheses, and collaborating with clients to understand their unique challenges. MarketPulse wasn't just a product, it was the manifestation of everything I had learned about marketing, technology, and business strategy throughout my career. Patricia studied the performance metrics with the kind of analytical attention that suggested she understood their significance. The platform's performance is certainly impressive, she said carefully. But I'm curious about the development costs, ongoing maintenance requirements, and most importantly, the knowledge transfer protocols. What happens if key personnel are unavailable? Mark Stevens consulted his laptop before responding. The development investment has been substantial, but the ROI has exceeded our projections. As for knowledge transfer, we've documented our processes and created training materials for the broader team. I knew that wasn't entirely accurate. While we had created some documentation, The truth was that Market Pulse's most sophisticated features relied heavily on my understanding of the underlying algorithms and my ability to interpret the data patterns it generated. I had been working on more comprehensive documentation, but the rapid pace of client demands and platform improvements had made it challenging to complete the knowledge transfer process. Bob moved to the next section of his presentation, which focused on team structure and departmental performance. The success we've achieved has been driven by strategic investments in talent and organizational design. Our digital innovation hub has become the engine of our growth, combining technical expertise with creative thinking in ways that our competitors haven't been able to replicate. The slide displayed my team's organizational chart, showing the 12 brilliant individuals who had chosen to work under my leadership. Jessica Martinez's photo appeared next to her title as Senior Marketing Analyst, along with bullet points highlighting her contributions to our most successful campaigns. David Kim's creative director role was illustrated with examples of the award-winning campaign designs he had developed. Rachel Thompson's social media innovations were quantified in terms of engagement rates and conversion metrics. Each member of this team brings unique expertise, Bob explained. But more importantly, they've learned to work together in ways that amplify their individual contributions. The collaborative culture and knowledge sharing within the Digital Innovation Hub has created something greater than the sum of its parts. I felt a deep sense of pride as I watched him describe our team dynamics. Building that collaborative culture had been one of my greatest challenges and most significant achievements as a leader. These weren't just employees following directions. They were creative professionals who had bought into a shared vision of what marketing could become when technology and human insight were properly combined. Patricia's expression remained neutral, but I noticed that she was taking notes in a leather-bound notebook with a gold pen that probably cost more than most people spent on office supplies in a year. Her handwriting was precise and controlled, matching everything else about her presentation. I couldn't see what she was writing, but her focus on the organizational details made me slightly uncomfortable. The team structure raises some interesting questions about scalability and risk management, Patricia said, looking up from her notes. While the collaborative approach has clearly been effective, it also creates potential vulnerabilities. What happens if this particular configuration changes? Bob paused for a moment, seeming to consider her question carefully. That's a valid concern, Patricia, but I think it underestimates the strength of the systems and processes we've built. The success isn't dependent on any single individual. It's based on a proven methodology that can be replicated and scaled. I felt a slight twinge of disagreement with Bob's characterization, though I understood why he was positioning our success in systemic rather than individual terms. The reality was more complex. While we had indeed created systems and processes, much of our success relied on the specific combination of skills, relationships, and insights that our particular team configuration provided. Linda Foster added her perspective with characteristic optimism. I think what's particularly impressive is how the Digital Innovation Hub has elevated the performance of our other departments as well. The insights and tools they've developed have improved outcomes across our entire client portfolio. She was absolutely right about that. My team hadn't worked in isolation. We had actively collaborated with other departments to share knowledge and tools that improved overall company performance. Our analytics capabilities had helped the sales team qualify prospects more effectively. Our technology innovations had streamlined project management for the traditional creative teams. Our client insights had informed strategic decisions across multiple departments. Bob nodded enthusiastically. Exactly, Linda. This isn't just about one department's success. It's about how innovation in one area can transform an entire organization. The Digital Innovation Hub has become a catalyst for company-wide improvement. Mark Stevens looked up from his financial projections with the kind of expression that accountants get when numbers align perfectly with strategic goals. From a purely financial perspective, the return on investment has been exceptional. The salary and technology costs for the Digital Innovation Hub represent approximately 18% of our total operating expenses. But the department has been responsible for generating over 60% of our new business revenue. Those numbers hit me like a physical sensation. I had known our performance was strong, but hearing Mark quantify our contribution in such stark terms was both thrilling and slightly overwhelming. 60% of new business revenue from 18% of operating expenses represented the kind of efficiency that business schools used as case studies. Patricia made another note in her leather-bound notebook, her expression giving nothing away. ROI calculations can be influenced by how we attribute revenue and allocate costs, she said in a measured tone. It's important to ensure we're not creating artificial metrics that might obscure underlying inefficiencies. There was something in her response that felt like cold water thrown on what should have been a moment of celebration. She wasn't wrong about the complexity of ROI calculations, but her focus on potential problems rather than demonstrated success felt deliberate. I began to sense that this meeting might not unfold the way I had anticipated. Bob moved to his final slides, which outlined strategic recommendations for the coming fiscal year. Based on the success we've achieved and the market opportunities we've identified, I believe we're positioned for another year of significant growth. The Digital Innovation Hub has proven its value, and I think the time has come to expand their mandate and increase their resources. My heart began beating faster as I realized that Bob was essentially advocating for everything I had hoped this meeting would accomplish. He was recommending expanded authority, increased budget allocation, and formal recognition of our strategic importance to the company. This was the moment I had been preparing for throughout my entire career at Horizon. The market demand for our services continues to exceed our capacity, Bob continued. We have a waiting list of potential clients who specifically want to work with our Digital Innovation Hub. I believe we should authorize immediate expansion of the team and begin developing additional proprietary tools that can further differentiate us from our competitors. Linda Foster was nodding enthusiastically, and even Mark Stevens looked pleased with the financial projections that supported Bob's recommendations. The energy in the room felt positive and forward-looking, exactly what I had hoped for when I received the meeting invitation. But Patricia's expression remained unreadable, and when Bob finished his presentation, she didn't immediately respond with the kind of enthusiasm that his recommendations seemed to warrant. Instead, she consulted her notes and then looked around the table with the kind of calculated attention that made me feel like a specimen being examined under a microscope. Bob's presentation has been very thorough, she said finally, her voice carrying a tone that suggested a significant transition was coming. The performance metrics are certainly impressive, and the market response has exceeded expectations. However, I think we need to examine these achievements within a broader strategic context. Something in her phrasing made my stomach tighten. The word, however, had been delivered with the kind of emphasis that suggested everything positive that had been said was about to be reframed in a very different light. Patricia stood and moved to the presentation screen, taking control of the meeting with the kind of natural authority that comes from decades of boardroom experience. Before we discuss expansion plans, I think we need to address some fundamental questions about organizational structure, resource allocation, and long-term sustainability. She advanced to a slide that I hadn't seen before, one that clearly wasn't part of Bob's prepared presentation. The slide was titled Strategic Assessment, Digital Innovation Hub, and contained bullet points that made my blood run cold. After conducting a comprehensive analysis of our current operations, Patricia continued, I've identified several areas of concern that I believe require immediate attention. The first bullet point read, concentration risk, over-reliance on specialized personnel. The second stated, resource allocation, disproportionate investment in single department. The third declared operational efficiency, redundancies with existing capabilities. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. These weren't the kind of observations that led to expansion and recognition. They were the precursors to restructuring and budget cuts. Patricia had clearly prepared her own assessment of my department, and it painted a very different picture than the one Bob had presented. While the Digital Innovation Hub has achieved notable results, Patricia said, her tone remaining professionally neutral, we must ask ourselves whether this success justifies the continued investment of resources, particularly when similar capabilities might be developed within our existing departmental structure. Linda Foster looked confused, and Mark Stevens was frowning at his laptop screen as if the numbers he had been celebrating moments earlier had somehow changed. Bob's expression showed the kind of careful diplomacy that senior executives employ when they realize a meeting is taking an unexpected direction. Patricia advanced to her next slide, which showed a comparative analysis of marketing agencies that had achieved growth without specialized digital innovation departments. Industry best practices suggest that successful agencies integrate digital capabilities across all departments, rather than concentrating them in isolated teams. This approach reduces risk while maintaining competitive capabilities. I wanted to speak, to challenge the assumptions underlying her analysis, but something about the carefully orchestrated nature of her presentation suggested that interruptions would not be welcome. Patricia had clearly spent considerable time preparing this alternative narrative, and she was determined to present it completely before opening the floor for discussion. Furthermore, she continued, our current structure creates unnecessary complexity in project management and client communication. Clients are sometimes confused about which team is responsible for which deliverables, and internal coordination requires additional administrative overhead that reduces overall efficiency. That characterization was simply false. Our client feedback consistently praised the integrated approach we had developed, and our project management systems had actually reduced administrative overhead by streamlining communication and deliverable tracking. But Patricia was presenting her assessment as fact, not opinion, and the formal nature of her presentation gave her words a weight that my internal objections couldn't immediately counter. The next slide showed financial projections that painted the Digital Innovation Hub as a cost center rather than a profit driver. The numbers were technically accurate, but they had been manipulated through creative accounting that allocated overhead costs disproportionately to my department, while minimizing the revenue attribution for our client successes. When we examine the true cost of maintaining our current structure, Patricia explained, including salary, benefits, technology infrastructure, and allocated overhead, the financial picture becomes more complex. While the department generates significant revenue, the profit margins are lower than they initially appear. Mark Stevens was staring at the screen with the kind of expression that accountants get when they see numbers that don't match their own calculations. I could tell he was mentally working through the cost allocation methodology, and his frown suggested he was finding discrepancies with Patricia's analysis. Patricia's final slide was titled Strategic Recommendation, Operational Restructuring, and contained a single, devastating bullet point. Eliminate Digital Innovation Hub as separate department, integrate capabilities across existing teams, reallocate resources for maximum efficiency. The words hit me like a physical blow. After everything we had accomplished, after all the recognition and success and strategic importance, Patricia was recommending that my department be eliminated entirely. Not reduced, not restructured, not modified, eliminated. Bob found his voice first, though it carried a strain that suggested he was struggling to process what he had just heard. Patricia, I appreciate the thoroughness of your analysis, but I think we need to carefully consider the potential consequences of such a dramatic restructuring. The Digital Innovation Hub has become central to our competitive position. Patricia returned to her seat with the kind of composure that suggested she had anticipated pushback and prepared for it. Bob, I understand your concerns, and I'm not suggesting we abandon our digital capabilities. What I'm proposing is a more efficient integration of those capabilities across our existing structure. The talented individuals currently working in the Digital Innovation Hub would be reassigned to other departments where their skills can be utilized more effectively. Linda Foster looked like she was trying to solve a complex puzzle. But Patricia, our client specifically requests to work with the Digital Innovation Hub. How would we maintain those relationships if the team is dispersed across other departments? That's an excellent question, Linda, Patricia replied, her tone suggesting she had expected this concern as well. Client relationships are based on results, not organizational charts. If we can deliver the same quality of service through a more efficient structure, our clients will adapt. In fact, they may prefer the simplified communication that comes with integrated teams. I finally found my voice, though it came out smaller than I had intended. The integration isn't as simple as reassigning personnel. Market Pulse requires specialized knowledge that can't be easily transferred. The algorithms, the data interpretation, the strategic applications, these aren't skills that can be quickly replicated across different departments. Patricia turned her attention to me with the kind of focused intensity that made me feel like I was being evaluated for weaknesses. Sarah, I appreciate your dedication to the platform you've helped develop, but sustainable business practices can't rely on knowledge that exists in only one person's head. If Market Pulse is truly valuable, then it needs to be documented and systematized in ways that make it accessible to our broader team. There was something in her tone that suggested she viewed my specialized knowledge not as an asset, but as a liability. The implication was that I had been deliberately hoarding information rather than building systems, which was both unfair and inaccurate. I had been working on documentation and knowledge transfer, but the complexity of the platform required more time and resources than we had been able to allocate. Mark Stevens finally spoke up, his voice carrying the careful precision of someone who spent his days working with numbers that didn't lie. Patricia, I'm looking at the financial projections you've presented, and I'm having trouble reconciling them with the revenue attribution models we've been using. The cost allocation methodology appears to have been modified in ways that might not accurately represent the department's contribution. Patricia's expression didn't change, but there was a slight pause before she responded. Mark, I appreciate your attention to detail. The methodology I've used follows standard accounting practices for evaluating departmental efficiency. If you'd like to discuss the specifics, I'm happy to walk you through the calculations after the meeting. Bob was looking increasingly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. I think what we're dealing with here are two different perspectives on the same set of facts. Both analyses have merit, but they lead to very different conclusions about our optimal path forward. That's exactly right, Bob, Patricia said, and for the first time since she had begun her presentation, she smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the kind of expression that suggested she had been maneuvering toward this moment throughout the entire meeting. Which brings us to the decision point, she continued. As the board's newest member and largest investor, I believe I have a responsibility to ensure that Horizon Marketing Solutions operates with maximum efficiency and sustainable practices. Based on my analysis, I recommend that we vote today on the restructuring proposal. The word vote landed in the room like a stone thrown into still water. Bob's expression shifted from diplomatic concern to something approaching alarm. Linda Foster looked genuinely shocked. Mark Stevens was still staring at his laptop screen, as if the numbers might change if he looked at them hard enough. Patricia reached into her leather portfolio and withdrew a document that had clearly been prepared in advance. I've drafted a formal resolution that outlines the restructuring plan, including timelines for implementation and protocols for personnel transitions. I believe we should vote on this resolution today so that we can begin the transition process immediately. I felt like I was watching a carefully choreographed performance that had been planned long before any of us had entered the boardroom. Patricia's presentation, her alternative financial analysis, her prepared resolution. None of this was spontaneous. She had been planning this moment since the day she invested in Horizon Marketing Solutions. Bob was shaking his head slowly, the kind of gesture that suggested he was still trying to process what was happening. Patricia, this is a significant decision that affects multiple departments and client relationships. I think we need more time to analyze the implications and develop alternative approaches. Bob, I understand your caution, Patricia replied. But prolonged deliberation on organizational efficiency issues can be counterproductive. The market doesn't wait for perfect consensus, and neither should we. Sometimes leadership requires making difficult decisions quickly and decisively. Linda Foster tried one more time to inject reason into what felt like an increasingly surreal situation. But what about our client commitments? We have contracts that specifically reference the Digital Innovation Hub and the Market Pulse platform. How do we fulfill those obligations if we eliminate the team that created them? Patricia's response carried the kind of confidence that comes from having anticipated every possible objection. Contractual obligations can be met through various organizational structures. What matters is delivering results, not maintaining specific departmental configurations. Our legal team has reviewed the relevant contracts, and we have the flexibility to restructure as needed. I realized with growing horror that Patricia had done more than prepare a presentation. She had conducted a comprehensive analysis of our legal vulnerabilities, our client contracts, and our internal operations. This wasn't an impromptu recommendation based on recent observations. This was a strategic assault that had been planned and prepared with military precision. Mark Stevens closed his laptop with a decisive snap that seemed to punctuate the tension in the room. Patricia, I need to formally object to both the methodology and the timeline you're proposing. The financial analysis requires more scrutiny, and the operational implications need careful consideration. I can't support a vote on restructuring without additional analysis. Patricia's smile didn't waver. But her tone carried a subtle edge that suggested Mark's objection was more of an inconvenience than a serious obstacle. "Mark, I appreciate your diligence, but we can't allow perfect to be the enemy of good. The analysis I've presented follows established business practices, and the recommendations are based on proven organizational models." She paused and looked around the table, making eye contact with each board member in turn. "However, if the board prefers, we can certainly take additional time to review the details. But I want to be clear that delays in addressing organizational inefficiencies carry their own risks. Every day we maintain suboptimal structures, we're missing opportunities and misallocating resources." Bob was clearly struggling with the political dynamics of the situation. Patricia's investment gave her significant influence, but the other board members were expressing legitimate concerns about her proposal. The tension between financial authority and operational wisdom was playing out in real time, and I was sitting in the middle of it watching my career being debated like a line item in a budget proposal. "I propose a compromise," Bob said finally. "Let's table the restructuring vote for 2 weeks while we conduct our own independent analysis. We can bring in external consultants to evaluate both perspectives and provide objective recommendations." Patricia considered this suggestion with the kind of careful attention that suggested she was weighing costs and benefits, rather than simply reacting emotionally. "Bob, I'm willing to consider a brief delay, but I want to establish clear parameters. 2 weeks for analysis with a firm commitment to vote at our next meeting regardless of the external recommendations." Linda Foster looked relieved at the prospect of additional time to consider the implications. "That seems reasonable. 2 weeks gives us time to review the client impact analysis and explore alternative approaches that might address Patricia's concerns while preserving our competitive capabilities." I wanted to feel relieved by the temporary reprieve, but something about Patricia's easy acceptance of the delay made me suspicious. She had been planning this assault for months. 2 weeks wouldn't change the fundamental dynamics that had brought us to this point. If anything, the delay might give her time to address the objections that Mark and Bob had raised. Patricia gathered her presentation materials with the kind of efficiency that suggested the meeting had accomplished exactly what she had intended. "Excellent. I'll work with our external consultants to conduct a comprehensive analysis that addresses everyone's concerns. In the meantime, I think it would be prudent to begin preliminary planning for potential restructuring scenarios." The phrase preliminary planning sent another chill through me. Patricia was essentially asking for permission to begin dismantling my department while we waited for the official vote. She was positioning the restructuring as inevitable, rather than one possible outcome among many. Bob was nodding slowly, though his expression suggested he was still processing the full implications of what had just transpired. "I think we should also involve department heads in the analysis process. Sarah's insights will be crucial for understanding the operational implications of any structural changes." Patricia's gaze landed on me with the kind of attention that made me feel simultaneously visible and insignificant. "Of course, Bob, Sarah's cooperation will be essential for ensuring a smooth transition, regardless of what we ultimately decide." The word transition carried a finality that made my stomach drop. Patricia wasn't talking about potential changes anymore. She was talking about implementation details. In her mind, the outcome was already determined, and the 2-week analysis period was simply a bureaucratic formality. As the meeting began to wind down, Patricia reached into her purse and withdrew her checkbook. The gesture seemed casual, almost absent-minded, but I had learned to pay attention to everything she did. She wrote a check with the kind of flowing handwriting that suggested years of signing important documents, tore it from the book, and slid it across the table toward me. "Sarah," she said, her voice carrying a tone of what might have been sympathy if it had contained any actual warmth, "I want you to know that this isn't personal. You've contributed significantly to Horizon's success, and that contribution deserves recognition." I looked down at the check, and my heart stopped. It was made out to me for $500. $500 for building a department that had generated over $8 million in new business. $500 for creating a proprietary platform that had revolutionized our competitive position. $500 for 2 years of 18-hour days, weekend strategy sessions, and the kind of innovative thinking that had elevated Horizon from a regional player to a national competitor. Patricia's voice continued with the kind of professional courtesy that made her words feel even more insulting. I know the next 2 weeks will be challenging as we work through the analysis process. This is just a small token of appreciation for your dedication and professionalism during what I'm sure is a difficult period. I stared at the check, and suddenly everything became crystal clear. This wasn't about organizational efficiency or resource allocation, or any of the business justifications Patricia had presented. This was about power, control, and a personal grudge that had been simmering since the night Michael and I ended our engagement. The woman who had told me I wasn't good enough for her son was now telling me I wasn't good enough for my career. The mother who had made it clear that I would never be part of her family was now making it clear that I wouldn't be part of my professional family either. But as I looked at that $500 check, something shifted inside me. The humiliation and shock began transforming into something else entirely. A cold, clear understanding of exactly what I was dealing with, and exactly what I needed to do about it. Patricia Richardson might have the board chairmanship, the investment leverage, and the political connections to eliminate my department. But she had made one crucial mistake. She assumed that destroying my position at Horizon would destroy me. She had no idea what I was capable of building on my own. I folded the check carefully and placed it in my blazer pocket without saying a word. The silence that followed felt heavy, charged with unspoken tensions that had nothing to do with business strategy and everything to do with personal history. Patricia watched me with the kind of attention that suggested she expected some sort of emotional reaction, perhaps tears or anger, or a desperate plea for reconsideration. Instead, I maintained the same professional composure I had cultivated throughout my entire career at Horizon. My voice, when I finally spoke, was steady and measured. Thank you, Patricia. I appreciate the recognition, and I look forward to participating in the analysis process over the next 2 weeks. Bob seemed relieved by my diplomatic response, though I could see the concern in his eyes. He knew as well as anyone that the Digital Innovation Hub represented more than just a departmental structure. It was the embodiment of Horizon's transformation into a technology-forward agency. Linda Foster was gathering her materials with the kind of distracted efficiency that suggested she was already mentally working through the implications of what had just transpired. Mark Stevens lingered after the others began to leave, his expression thoughtful in the way that numbers-focused people get when they're trying to reconcile conflicting data sets. Sarah, he said quietly, I want you to know that the financial analysis Patricia presented doesn't align with my understanding of your department's contribution. I'll be conducting my own review over the next 2 weeks. I nodded gratefully, though I suspected that Mark's support, while genuine, might not be sufficient to counteract Patricia's influence. The dynamics in that boardroom had made it clear that this wasn't really about financial efficiency or organizational optimization. This was about power, and Patricia Richardson had significantly more of it than anyone else at that table. As I walked back to the 4th floor, the familiar sounds of my team working felt both comforting and fragile. Jessica was on a conference call with a client, her voice animated as she explained the latest campaign metrics. David was reviewing creative concepts with 2 junior designers, providing the kind of thoughtful feedback that had made him invaluable to our process. Rachel was analyzing social media performance data, her screens filled with colorful charts that showed engagement trends across multiple platforms. None of them knew that their positions had just been debated like line items in a budget proposal. They were focused on the work they loved, contributing to projects that challenged them intellectually and professionally. The thought of watching Patricia dismantle this team, scatter these talented people across other departments where their collaborative chemistry would be lost, filled me with a determination that surprised me with its intensity. I closed my office door and sat behind my desk, staring out at the Austin skyline while I processed what had just happened. The afternoon sun was casting long shadows across downtown, and the familiar view that usually calmed me now felt like I was looking at it for the last time. Patricia's check sat on my desk like a physical reminder of exactly how she valued my contributions. My phone buzzed with a text message from Michael. Heard Mom joined your board. Hope that's going well for you? The casual tone of his message, as if his mother's presence at my company was just an interesting coincidence rather than a calculated attack, revealed everything I needed to know about how much he understood the situation. Michael had always been willfully blind to his mother's more manipulative tendencies, And apparently that hadn't changed in the months since our engagement ended. I didn't respond to his text. There wasn't anything to say that wouldn't make the situation more complicated than it already was. Instead, I opened my laptop and began documenting everything that had happened in the boardroom. Not just the facts of what was discussed, but the subtle dynamics, the prepared nature of Patricia's presentation, the way she had orchestrated the entire meeting to achieve a predetermined outcome. The next morning arrived with the kind of crisp October clarity that made Austin feel like the best place in the world to build a career. I arrived at the office early, as was my habit, and found myself moving through the familiar routines with a heightened awareness of everything I might be losing. The morning strategy meeting with my team felt more precious than usual, as I watched them collaborate on solutions to client challenges with the kind of creative energy that had made our department special. Jessica presented the latest results from our Cloud Tech Solutions campaign, and the numbers were exceptional even by our standards. Lead quality was up 37%, conversion rates had improved by 22%, and the client was already asking about expanding their contract for the following year. These were the kinds of results that should have made Patricia's elimination proposal laughable, but I was beginning to understand that traditional business logic wasn't driving her decision-making process. David showed us mock-ups for a new campaign targeting cybersecurity companies, and his creative approach demonstrated exactly why our integrated team structure was so effective. He had incorporated insights from Jessica's analytics work and Rachel's social media research to create messaging that was both visually compelling and strategically targeted. The synergy between different skill sets was obvious and measurable, but it was also fragile, dependent on relationships and understanding that couldn't be easily replicated if the team was dispersed. Throughout the day, I found myself paying attention to details I had previously taken for granted. The way Rachel's enthusiasm for emerging social platforms influenced our strategic recommendations. The way David's design sensibilities shaped our approach to visual storytelling. The way Jessica's analytical insights informed our targeting decisions. These weren't just individual contributions. They were interconnected elements of a system that produced results greater than the sum of its parts. But I also began to notice things that Patricia's criticism had highlighted, whether she intended to or not. The documentation of our processes was indeed incomplete. The knowledge transfer protocols were informal and relationship dependent. The training materials that Mark had mentioned in the meeting were more aspirational than actual. In her attack on our department, Patricia had identified real vulnerabilities that I had been meaning to address but had never prioritized properly. Over the weekend, I worked from my apartment in East Austin, surrounded by the familiar comfort of my own space while I tried to process the full implications of what was happening. My laptop was filled with 2 years' worth of strategic documents, algorithm specifications, client insights, and competitive analysis that represented the intellectual foundation of everything we had built at Horizon. I began creating a comprehensive backup of everything I had developed, not because I was planning to leave, but because Patricia's presentation had made me realize how much of our success depended on knowledge that existed primarily in my head and on my personal devices. The Market Pulse platform, in particular, relied on algorithms and data interpretation methods that I had developed through months of trial and error, testing different approaches until I found combinations that produced exceptional results. As I worked through the documentation process, I began to understand the true scope of what Patricia was trying to eliminate. This wasn't just a department. It was an entire approach to marketing that had taken years to develop and refine. The client relationships, the technology platform, the team chemistry, the strategic insights, all of it would be lost if her restructuring proposal was implemented. Monday morning brought news that confirmed my growing suspicions about Patricia's intentions. Jennifer Parker, who had been my executive assistant before being promoted to work directly with Patricia, stopped by my office with information that she clearly felt conflicted about sharing. "Sarah," she said, closing my office door behind her, "I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but Patricia has been conducting phone interviews with external consultants all weekend. She's not looking for objective analysis. She's looking for validation of decisions she's already made." Jennifer's revelation didn't surprise me, but it did clarify the timeline I was working with. Patricia wasn't waiting for the 2-week analysis period to conclude before moving forward with her plans. She was using that time to build an even stronger case for elimination, while creating the appearance of thorough deliberation. There's more. Jennifer continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. She's been asking questions about your employment contract, your non-compete agreements, and the intellectual property clauses in your hiring documents. She's not just planning to eliminate the department, she's planning to make sure you can't recreate it somewhere else. That information hit me like a physical blow. Patricia wasn't just attacking my current position, she was trying to destroy my future opportunities as well. The non-compete agreements I had signed when joining Horizon were standard for the industry, but they could be interpreted broadly enough to prevent me from working for competitors or starting my own agency for up to 2 years after leaving the company. Jennifer's expression showed the kind of genuine concern that reminded me why I had always appreciated her professionalism and discretion. Sarah, I've been working in corporate environments for 15 years, and I've never seen someone put this much effort into destroying a single person's career. Whatever happened between you and her son, she's taking it very personally. After Jennifer left, I sat in my office staring at Patricia's check, which I had placed in my desk drawer like a reminder of exactly what I was dealing with. $500 for 2 years of innovation, $8 million in new business, and the transformation of Horizon from a regional agency into a national competitor. The insulting nature of the gesture wasn't accidental. It was designed to make me feel small, insignificant, easily replaceable. But as I thought about Jennifer's warning regarding the non-compete agreements, I realized that Patricia had made a crucial miscalculation. She was assuming that my value lay entirely in my ability to work for competing agencies, or start a direct competitor to Horizon. She didn't understand that the real value lay in the knowledge, relationships, and insights I had developed, assets that could be applied in ways that had nothing to do with traditional marketing agencies. That afternoon, I did something I had never done in my entire career at Horizon. I left the office early and drove to Café Luna, the little coffee shop where I had always done my best strategic thinking. Sitting in the corner booth with my laptop and a notebook, I began sketching out possibilities that had nothing to do with saving my position at Horizon and everything to do with building something entirely new. The Market Pulse platform was more than just a tool for marketing agencies. It was a comprehensive approach to data analysis that could be applied across multiple industries. The client relationships I had built weren't just connections to potential marketing contracts. They were partnerships with innovative companies that were always looking for new ways to solve complex business challenges. The team I had assembled wasn't just a group of marketing professionals. They were creative problem solvers who could adapt their skills to different contexts and opportunities. As I worked through these possibilities, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: excitement about the future rather than anxiety about the present. Patricia's attack on my department had been intended to diminish my options, but instead it was forcing me to think bigger than I had ever considered before. I began researching the technology startup ecosystem in Austin, exploring funding opportunities, investigating office spaces, and reaching out to contacts I had made throughout my career. The city's entrepreneurial culture was one of the reasons I had moved here after graduate school, and now I was finally in a position to take advantage of it. The next few days at Horizon felt surreal, as I continued managing my team's projects while simultaneously planning for a future that might not include the company at all. Patricia's analysis period was proceeding exactly as Jennifer had predicted. She was meeting with consultants who specialized in organizational restructuring, all of whom seemed to be confirming her predetermined conclusions about the necessity of eliminating redundant departments. Bob stopped by my office on Wednesday afternoon, his expression carrying the kind of diplomatic concern that suggested he was trying to manage multiple competing pressures. "Sarah, I want you to know that I'm fighting for your department. The results speak for themselves, and I believe Patricia's proposal is short-sighted." I appreciated his support, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. Bob was a good CEO who genuinely cared about the company's success, but he was also politically astute enough to recognize that challenging Patricia's proposal carried significant risks. Her investment gave her leverage that extended far beyond the elimination of a single department. "I understand the difficult position you're in," I told him. "Whatever happens, I want you to know that I'm committed to ensuring a smooth transition that protects our client relationships and preserves the value we've created." Bob looked relieved by my diplomatic response, though I suspected he was also puzzled by my apparent acceptance of what increasingly seemed like an inevitable outcome. He had expected me to fight harder, to present counterproposals, to lobby other board members for support. Instead, I was demonstrating the kind of professional grace that made transitions easier for everyone involved. What Bob didn't understand was that I had moved beyond fighting for my position at Horizon. I was now focused on building something that Patricia Richardson couldn't touch, couldn't eliminate, and couldn't control. The attack on my department had clarified something that I should have recognized years earlier. I was capable of much more than being a high-performing employee in someone else's company. Thursday brought the news I had been expecting. Mark Stevens stopped by my office with the expression of someone who had run the numbers multiple times and didn't like what they were telling him. "Sarah, I have completed my independent analysis of Patricia's financial projections, and while I disagree with some of her methodology, I have to admit that her cost allocation model isn't entirely unreasonable." Mark's reluctant validation of Patricia's approach wasn't surprising. She was too experienced to present analysis that could be easily discredited. Her mistake wasn't in the numbers, but in assuming that eliminating my department would actually achieve the efficiency gains she had projected. The real issue, Mark continued, is that her projections assume we can maintain current performance levels while reducing costs through restructuring. But there's no historical data to support that assumption, because we've never attempted to integrate these specialized capabilities across multiple departments. I nodded thoughtfully, though my mind was already focused on problems that had nothing to do with Horizon's internal cost structures. "Mark, what would you say if I told you that I'm not planning to fight the restructuring proposal?" His expression shifted from diplomatic concern to genuine surprise. "Sarah, that doesn't make sense. You've built something remarkable here. Why would you just walk away from it?" "Because sometimes walking away is the only way to preserve what you've actually built," I replied. "Patricia can eliminate my department, but she can't eliminate the knowledge, relationships, and capabilities that made it successful. Those assets belong to me, not to Horizon." Mark was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications of what I had just said. "You're talking about starting your own company." "I'm talking about building something that can't be eliminated by board votes or budget cuts," I said. "Something that belongs to the people who create the value, not the people who control the meeting rooms." Over the weekend, I made the calls that would change everything. First, I reached out to Dr. Amanda Rodriguez, a former professor from Northwestern who had left academia to become a venture capital partner, specializing in marketing technology startups. Amanda had been following my work at Horizon through industry publications, and when I explained what I was considering, her enthusiasm was immediate and infectious. "Sarah, I've been wondering when you were going to realize that you're thinking too small," she said during our video call. "The platform you've built has applications far beyond traditional marketing agencies. Have you considered positioning it as a comprehensive business intelligence solution?" Amanda's perspective helped me see possibilities I hadn't fully considered. Market Pulse wasn't just a marketing tool. It was a data analysis platform that could help companies understand customer behavior, predict market trends, and optimize operations across multiple functions. The technology I had developed for marketing campaigns could be adapted for sales forecasting, product development, strategic planning, and competitive analysis. My second call was to Marcus Chen, no relation despite the shared surname, who had founded 3 successful technology companies and now worked as an advisor to startups in the Austin ecosystem. Marcus had built his career on identifying talented people who were ready to make the transition from employee to entrepreneur, and his questions during our conversation were exactly what I needed to hear. "The most important question isn't whether you can build a successful company," he said. "The question is whether you're ready to handle the psychological transition from being part of someone else's organization to being responsible for creating your own. That's a bigger change than most people anticipate." Marcus's point resonated deeply with me. For my entire career, I had been focused on performing within existing structures, optimizing systems that other people had created, adding value to organizations that had been built by previous generations of leaders. The prospect of creating something entirely new, of being responsible for every aspect of an organization's success or failure, was both thrilling and terrifying. My third call was to Elena Vasquez, a brilliant data scientist who had left Google to join a small consulting firm in San Francisco. Elena had been following my work through industry networks, and when I explained what I was planning, she immediately understood the potential. "Sarah, I've been waiting for someone to approach data analysis the way you're describing," she said. Most companies are still thinking about marketing, sales, and operations as separate functions. But the data tells a unified story if you know how to read it properly. What you're proposing could revolutionize how businesses understand their own performance. Elena's excitement was contagious, and by the end of our conversation, I had tentatively invited her to consider joining whatever company I decided to create. Her expertise in machine learning and predictive analytics would complement the marketing focus I had developed, creating capabilities that neither of us could achieve individually. By Sunday evening, I had the outline of a business plan, preliminary commitments from potential team members, and meetings scheduled with 3 different venture capital firms. I also had something I hadn't possessed in months: complete clarity about what I wanted to accomplish and confidence in my ability to achieve it. Monday morning at Horizon felt like I was visiting a previous version of my life. The familiar routines, the team meetings, the client calls, everything that had once felt essential now seemed like preparation for something larger and more meaningful. I wasn't angry about Patricia's attack on my department anymore. If anything, I was grateful that she had forced me to recognize possibilities that I had been too comfortable to explore on my own. Patricia's check was still in my desk drawer, and as I looked at it Monday morning, I realized it had become a symbol of something very different than she had intended. Instead of representing my insignificance, it now represented the last connection between my future and my past. In a few days, I would cash that check and use the money for something Patricia would never expect: the first deposit into the bank account for my new company. The irony was perfect, and I found myself smiling as I imagined her reaction when she eventually discovered what that $500 had helped to create. Patricia Richardson had intended to humiliate me with a token payment for years of contribution. Instead, she had provided the seed funding for the company that would eventually make her restructuring proposal completely irrelevant. By Tuesday afternoon, I had made my decision. I wouldn't fight the elimination vote at Thursday's board meeting. Instead, I would accept it gracefully, complete the transition process professionally, and begin building something that Patricia Richardson could never touch. The woman who had told me I wasn't good enough for her family was about to discover exactly what I was capable of when I stopped trying to prove my worth to people who had already decided not to see it. Thursday's board meeting felt like watching a play where I already knew the ending. Patricia arrived precisely on time, carrying the same leather portfolio that had contained her prepared assault on my department 2 weeks earlier. Bob looked tired, the kind of exhaustion that comes from fighting battles you know you can't win. Linda Foster seemed resigned, and Mark Stevens wore the expression of someone who had run the numbers multiple ways and didn't like any of the outcomes. The motion to eliminate the Digital Innovation Hub passed by a vote of 3-2, with Patricia casting the deciding ballot. She delivered her rationale with the same polished professionalism she had demonstrated throughout the process, explaining how the restructuring would improve efficiency, reduce redundancies, and position Horizon for sustainable growth. Bob and Mark voted against the proposal, but their objections were noted and overruled with parliamentary precision. I thanked the board for the opportunity to contribute to Horizon's success, expressed my commitment to ensuring a smooth transition, and left the meeting with the same professional grace I had maintained throughout the entire ordeal. Patricia's satisfied expression as I gathered my materials told me everything I needed to know about her perception of what had just transpired. She believed she had won decisively and permanently. What Patricia didn't know was that I had spent the previous 2 weeks conducting exit interviews with my entire team, not to gather feedback about their Horizon experience, but to understand their career aspirations and gauge their interest in new opportunities. Jessica Martinez had been frustrated for months by the limitations of working within Horizon's traditional client base. David Kim had been developing creative concepts that were too innovative for our current clients to appreciate. Rachel Thompson had been researching emerging social platforms that Horizon's risk-averse culture prevented her from exploring fully. The conversations I had with each team member revealed something that Patricia's organizational analysis had completely missed. The Digital Innovation Hub wasn't just a department. It was a collection of ambitious professionals who had been constrained by the very structure that Patricia was now attempting to preserve. Eliminating our department wouldn't integrate our capabilities across Horizon's existing teams. It would scatter talented people who were already looking for opportunities to grow beyond what a traditional marketing agency could offer. Within a week of the board vote, the cracks began to show in ways that Patricia's consultants hadn't anticipated. Cloud Tech Solutions, our largest client, requested an emergency meeting to discuss concerns about the transition process. The account had been managed through a combination of strategic analysis, creative execution, and technical implementation that required constant coordination between different skill sets. Without the integrated team structure, the handoff to traditional account management was creating confusion and delays. Jennifer Parker, still working as Patricia's executive assistant despite her obvious discomfort with the role, provided updates that painted a picture of growing panic among Horizon's senior leadership. The external consultants Patricia had hired to manage the transition were discovering that our processes were more complex and interconnected than their preliminary analysis had suggested. The documentation I had created was comprehensive but required practical experience to implement effectively. The client relationships were based on personal trust and demonstrated expertise that couldn't be easily transferred to account managers who lacked technical backgrounds. More importantly, the Market Pulse platform was revealing its dependence on interpretive skills that I had developed through months of trial and error. The algorithms generated data, but understanding what that data meant for strategic decision-making required a combination of analytical thinking and marketing intuition that couldn't be taught through training manuals. The junior analysts who had been assigned to operate the platform were producing reports that were technically accurate but strategically useless. Bob called me 3 days after the elimination vote, ostensibly to discuss transition logistics, but actually to express his growing concerns about the decision. "Sarah, I'm starting to think we made a serious mistake. The client feedback has been uniformly negative, and our internal teams are struggling to maintain the performance standards your department established." I listened to his concerns with sympathetic professionalism while simultaneously reviewing architectural plans for the office space I had just leased in Austin's emerging tech corridor. "Bob, I understand your frustration, but organizational transitions always involve temporary performance dips. I'm confident that Horizon will adapt and find new ways to serve your clients effectively." What I didn't tell Bob was that Dataflow Industries had already reached out to me directly, expressing interest in continuing our strategic partnership outside of the Horizon relationship. NextGen Analytics had made similar overtures, suggesting that their loyalty was to the results I had delivered rather than to the agency that had employed me. Cloud Tech Solutions had been more diplomatic in their communications, but their questions about my future plans suggested they were exploring alternatives to their Horizon contract. 2 weeks after my departure from Horizon, I signed the lease for a 4,000-square-foot office space in a converted warehouse that had been designed specifically for technology startups. The space featured open work areas, private offices, conference rooms equipped with state-of-the-art video conferencing technology, and a small kitchen where teams could collaborate over coffee and informal meals. The building housed 6 other startups, creating an environment that buzzed with the energy of people building something new and meaningful. Elena Vasquez arrived from San Francisco on a Tuesday morning, bringing with her 2 suitcases, a laptop bag, and 15 years of experience in predictive analytics that would form the foundation of our expanded capabilities. Her first reaction to our new office was exactly what I had hoped for: excitement about the possibilities rather than concern about the risks. "Sarah, this feels like the kind of place where people solve problems that haven't been solved before," she said as we walked through the space. "How quickly do you think we can get Market Pulse installed and operational?" Jessica Martinez gave her notice to Horizon that same week, followed by David Kim and Rachel Thompson. Their departures weren't coordinated or planned as group rebellion. Each of them had reached the same conclusion independently. The restructuring had eliminated not just our department, but the collaborative culture that had made their work meaningful. Traditional account management roles felt like steps backward for professionals who had been developing cutting-edge strategies for innovative clients. Patricia's response to the resignations was predictably focused on legal containment rather than strategic reconsideration. Jennifer reported that she had immediately contacted Horizon's legal team to review non-compete agreements and intellectual property clauses, looking for ways to prevent my former colleagues from joining whatever company I was creating. What Patricia's legal review discovered was both embarrassing and revealing. The non-compete agreements that Horizon had required were standard for account managers and creative directors, but they hadn't been written with technology professionals in mind. The clauses were specific to traditional marketing services and didn't extend to data analysis, business intelligence, or the kind of strategic consulting that my new company was positioned to provide. More importantly, the intellectual property agreements that governed Market Pulse were more complex than Patricia had understood. While Horizon owned the specific algorithms I had developed during my employment, the underlying analytical methodologies and strategic frameworks belonged to me personally. I could create new algorithms that produce similar results without violating any contractual obligations to my former employer. By the end of October, I had accomplished something that 2 months earlier would have seemed impossible. I had assembled a team of brilliant professionals in a workspace designed for innovation, with sufficient funding to operate for 18 months while we built and refined our service offerings. Chen Analytics, the name I had chosen for our company, was positioned to provide the kind of comprehensive business intelligence that traditional marketing agencies couldn't match, and management consulting firms couldn't deliver with our speed and specificity. Our first client was Dataflow Industries, who had been frustrated by the transition difficulties they experienced after my departure from Horizon. Their CEO, Marcus Thompson, had worked with me on 3 major campaigns over the previous 18 months, and his confidence in our capabilities made the sales process remarkably straightforward. Sarah, what we've learned from working with Horizon is that we don't really need a traditional marketing agency, Marcus explained during our first formal business meeting. What we need is strategic intelligence that helps us understand our market position and identify growth opportunities. Can Chen Analytics provide that kind of comprehensive analysis? The answer was absolutely yes, and our proposal to Dataflow demonstrated capabilities that went far beyond what we had been able to offer within Horizon's structure. Instead of limiting ourselves to marketing campaigns, we could analyze their entire customer acquisition process, identify operational inefficiencies, predict market trends, and develop strategic recommendations that integrated marketing, sales, and product development. Our second client came through Elena's network, a cybersecurity startup that needed help understanding why their customer acquisition costs were increasing despite improved product features. Traditional marketing analysis would have focused on campaign optimization, but our approach examined the relationship between their technical capabilities, market positioning, competitive landscape, and customer education requirements. The insights we generated for the cybersecurity client revealed something that no traditional agency would have discovered. Their customer acquisition challenges weren't related to marketing effectiveness, but to market timing. They were introducing advanced features before their target customers were ready to understand their value. Our recommendations focused on education-based content strategies and partnership development rather than advertising optimization. November brought news that confirmed my growing suspicions about Horizon's post-restructuring performance. CloudTech Solutions had terminated their contract after a series of campaign failures that demonstrated the kind of strategic confusion I had predicted. The account managers who inherited our client relationships were competent professionals, but they lacked the technical background necessary to understand their clients' complex business challenges. NextGen Analytics had transitioned their contract to a larger agency with more specialized technology capabilities, taking with them the industry credibility that had attracted other tech clients to Horizon. The referral network that had driven much of Horizon's recent growth was evaporating as word spread about the quality decline following the Digital Innovation Hub elimination. Bob's phone calls became more frequent and more desperate as the fourth quarter progressed. Sarah, I need to ask you something directly. Would you consider returning to Horizon in a consulting capacity? We could structure an arrangement that gives you significant autonomy while helping us rebuild our technology capabilities. His offer was generous in financial terms and represented exactly the kind of recognition I had hoped for 18 months earlier. But it also demonstrated his fundamental misunderstanding of what had changed. I wasn't interested in rebuilding Horizon's capabilities. I was focused on building something entirely new that couldn't be eliminated by board votes or undermined by personal vendettas. Bob, I appreciate the offer, but I'm committed to the direction I've chosen, I told him. However, I'd be happy to recommend some excellent consultants who could help Horizon develop new technology partnerships. December brought validation that exceeded my most optimistic projections. Chen Analytics had completed successful projects for 6 clients, generated over $400,000 in revenue, and built a reputation for delivering insights that transformed how companies understood their market opportunities. We were booked solid through the first quarter of the following year, with a waiting list of potential clients who had heard about our work through industry networks. More importantly, we had attracted the attention of venture capital firms that specialized in business intelligence and marketing technology. The conversations weren't about survival funding anymore. They were about growth capital that could accelerate our expansion into new markets and service offerings. Elena's predictive modeling capabilities had evolved our service offerings beyond anything I had imagined when we started. We could forecast market trends with unprecedented accuracy, identify emerging customer segments before they became obvious to competitors, and develop strategic recommendations that integrated data analysis with creative problem-solving. Patricia's attempt to destroy my career had inadvertently created the conditions for building something far more valuable than anything I could have accomplished within Horizon's structure. The elimination of my department had forced me to think beyond the limitations of traditional agency models and develop capabilities that addressed fundamental business challenges, rather than just marketing tactics. On the last day of December, I received an unexpected visitor at the Chen Analytics offices. Jennifer Parker had finally resigned from her position with Patricia and was exploring opportunities in Austin's growing technology sector. She appeared at our door with the kind of nervous excitement that suggested she had been planning this conversation for weeks. "Sarah, I need to tell you something that I probably should have mentioned months ago," she said as we sat in the small conference room that had become our informal meeting space. "Patricia's decision to eliminate your department wasn't based on financial analysis or organizational efficiency. It was personal from the very beginning." Jennifer's revelation wasn't surprising, but the details she provided filled in gaps that I hadn't fully understood. Patricia had begun planning the elimination strategy within days of learning about Michael's and my broken engagement. The investment in Horizon hadn't been motivated by business opportunity. It had been motivated by the desire to control my professional future in ways that would demonstrate her power and vindicate her objections to our relationship. "She spent months researching your background, your accomplishments, your client relationships," Jennifer continued. "She knew exactly how valuable your department was to Horizon's success. That's what made eliminating it such an effective way to hurt you personally." The conversation with Jennifer provided closure that I hadn't realized I needed. Patricia's attack hadn't been about business strategy or organizational optimization. It had been about demonstrating that she could destroy what I had built regardless of its value or success. The $500 check hadn't been an inadvertent insult. It had been a calculated humiliation designed to make me feel powerless and insignificant. But Jennifer's information also revealed the fundamental flaw in Patricia's approach. She had been so focused on destroying my position at Horizon that she had never considered what I might accomplish outside of her control. Her assumption that eliminating my department would eliminate my career had been based on a complete misunderstanding of where my value actually resided. January brought the news I had been expecting since November. Horizon Marketing Solutions was struggling financially following the loss of their technology clients and the collapse of their referral network. The restructuring that was supposed to improve efficiency had instead eliminated their competitive advantages and destroyed the relationships that had driven their recent growth. Patricia had maintained her board chairmanship, but her influence was diminished by the obvious failure of her strategic recommendations. Bob was facing pressure from other investors to develop new technology capabilities, but the damage to Horizon's reputation in the tech sector made it difficult to attract either clients or talent. More significantly, the broader marketing industry had taken notice of the talent exodus from Horizon and the success of the companies that had hired those departed professionals. Chen Analytics was being featured in industry publications as an example of how experienced agency veterans were redefining business intelligence services. Elena and I had been invited to speak at 3 major industry conferences about the evolution of marketing analytics and the integration of predictive modeling with strategic planning. The recognition we were receiving wasn't just about our individual success. It was about the new standards we were establishing for how data analysis could drive business strategy. February brought an opportunity that demonstrated just how dramatically the landscape had shifted. Marcus Chen, the advisor who had helped me understand the psychological transition from employee to entrepreneur, introduced me to the CEO of a Fortune 500 technology company that was looking for a strategic partner to help them understand emerging market trends. The conversation wasn't about marketing campaigns or lead generation. It was about comprehensive market intelligence that could inform product development, competitive positioning, and strategic planning across multiple business units. The potential contract was worth more than Chen Analytics had generated in our entire first year of operation. During the presentation meeting, the Fortune 500 CEO asked about our background and how we had developed such sophisticated capabilities. When I explained that our team had originally worked for a traditional marketing agency before starting our own company, his response surprised me with its directness. "So you're the team that left Horizon Marketing Solutions," he said with obvious recognition. "We had been considering them for a project last year, but after your department was eliminated, we decided to look elsewhere." Their technology capabilities were the only reason we had been interested in working with them. That comment crystallized something I had suspected but hadn't fully understood. Patricia's elimination of my department hadn't just damaged Horizon's current performance, it had destroyed their reputation for innovation within the broader technology community. Companies that might have considered Horizon for projects were now looking elsewhere, and the referral network that had driven their growth was directing opportunities to competitors instead. March brought the validation that completed my transformation from displaced employee to successful entrepreneur. Chen Analytics closed the Fortune 500 contract, secured Series A funding from a venture capital firm that specialized in business intelligence companies, and began planning for expansion into 3 new markets. Elena had been promoted to Chief Technology Officer, and we were recruiting additional team members who brought expertise in artificial intelligence, machine learning, and industry-specific analysis. The company that had started as a response to Patricia's attack was becoming a legitimate competitor to established consulting firms and technology companies. But the most satisfying development came through completely unexpected channels. Michael called on a Tuesday afternoon in mid-March, ostensibly to congratulate me on the industry recognition that Chen Analytics had been receiving. His tone was carefully neutral, but I could hear something beneath his words that suggested this conversation had been prompted by more than casual interest in my professional success. "Sarah, I wanted you to know that I think what you've built is really impressive," he said. "I've been following the coverage in the business journals, and it's clear that you've created something special." I thanked him for the recognition while wondering what had prompted him to reach out after months of silence. The answer came near the end of our conversation, delivered with the kind of careful diplomacy that suggested he was navigating complex family dynamics. "I also wanted to apologize for my mother's behavior last year," he said. "I didn't fully understand what was happening at the time, but I've learned more about her involvement with Horizon, and I think she let personal feelings influence business decisions that should have been objective." Michael's apology was both unnecessary and insufficient. Unnecessary because I had moved beyond needing validation from him or his family, and insufficient because it couldn't undo the damage that Patricia's attack had caused to other people who hadn't been as fortunate in their ability to create alternatives. "I appreciate that, Michael," I told him. "But what happened at Horizon led to opportunities I never would have considered otherwise. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us create space for the best things to emerge." April brought news that Patricia Richardson had resigned from Horizon's board of directors following what industry publications described as strategic disagreements with management. The resignation was presented as an amicable separation, but the timing suggested that her influence had been undermined by the obvious failure of her restructuring recommendations. Bob called to tell me about Patricia's departure, though his tone suggested the conversation was more about seeking absolution than sharing information. "Sarah, I want you to know that the board has formally acknowledged that eliminating the Digital Innovation Hub was a strategic error. We understand now that the decision was based on incomplete analysis and poor judgment." Horizon's formal acknowledgement of their mistake was satisfying on a personal level, but it couldn't restore the relationships they had damaged or rebuild the capabilities they had destroyed. The technology clients who had left were now working with competitors or specialized firms like Chen Analytics. The referral network that had driven their growth was directing opportunities elsewhere. More importantly, the talented professionals who had left Horizon weren't interested in returning to traditional agency structures. Jessica Martinez had been promoted to Vice President of Strategic Analysis at Chen Analytics. David Kim was leading our Creative Services division. Rachel Thompson was developing social media intelligence capabilities that attracted clients from across the country. May brought the opportunity that demonstrated just how completely the situation had been transformed. Bob approached me about the possibility of Chen Analytics acquiring Horizon's remaining technology assets and client relationships. The conversation was framed as a strategic partnership, but the financial terms he was suggesting amounted to a buyout of everything that remained valuable from my former employer. "Sarah, I think there could be significant synergies between our companies," Bob said during a meeting at Chen Analytics offices. "Horizon still has strong relationships in traditional marketing, and Chen Analytics has the technology capabilities that our clients are demanding. Together, we could create something more valuable than either company represents independently." The proposal was financially attractive and strategically logical. Horizon's traditional client base could benefit from our analytical capabilities, and their established operational infrastructure could accelerate our expansion plans. But accepting Bob's offer would also mean rescuing the organization that had tried to eliminate me, and validating the decisions that had caused so much unnecessary damage. Elena and I discussed the proposal extensively, analyzing it from multiple perspectives and considering the implications for our company culture and strategic direction. The financial benefits were clear, but we both had concerns about integrating with an organization that had demonstrated such poor judgment in its treatment of valuable employees. "The question isn't whether we can make this work financially," Elena said during one of our planning sessions. "The question is whether we want to be associated with their brand and their decision-making process. We've built something clean and focused here. Do we want to complicate that with legacy issues?" After 2 weeks of analysis and discussion, I made the decision that felt most aligned with our company's values and strategic vision. We would decline Bob's acquisition proposal, but we would offer to hire any Horizon employees who were interested in joining a company that valued innovation and strategic thinking. The offer attracted immediate interest from several Horizon professionals who had been frustrated by the company's post-restructuring direction. Within a month, we had hired 3 additional team members who brought complementary skills and established client relationships that expanded our capabilities in new directions. June brought recognition that exceeded anything I had imagined when I started Chen Analytics 15 months earlier. The American Marketing Association selected us for their Innovation Award, the same recognition that Horizon had received 2 years earlier when my department was driving their technology initiatives. Standing on the stage in Chicago to accept the award, I thought about the path that had brought me to that moment. Patricia Richardson's attack on my department had been intended to demonstrate her power and eliminate my influence within the industry. Instead, it had forced me to build something more valuable and sustainable than anything I could have accomplished within traditional organizational structures. The award ceremony was covered by industry publications that documented the rise of Chen Analytics and the innovative approaches we had developed for business intelligence and strategic planning. The articles mentioned my background at Horizon Marketing Solutions, but only as context for understanding how specialized expertise could be leveraged more effectively in entrepreneurial environments. July brought the full-circle moment that I had been anticipating since the day Patricia eliminated my department. Horizon Marketing Solutions announced that they were ceasing operations and selling their remaining assets to pay outstanding debts. The restructuring that was supposed to improve efficiency had instead eliminated their competitive advantages and destroyed the relationships that had sustained their business. Patricia's strategic vision had been implemented exactly as she had planned, with predictable results that validated every concern that Bob and Mark had raised during that boardroom meeting 18 months earlier. The elimination of specialized capabilities had indeed reduced costs, but it had also eliminated the innovations that differentiated Horizon from their competitors. The news of Horizon's closure was reported in the Austin Business Journal alongside a feature article about Chen Analytics' expansion into new markets and our recent Series B funding round. The contrast was stark but not coincidental. The same market forces that had destroyed Horizon's traditional model were driving demand for the innovative approaches that Chen Analytics represented. August brought Patricia Richardson back into my life one final time, though not in any way she could have anticipated. Jennifer Parker, who had become our Director of Operations, mentioned that Patricia had reached out to her through LinkedIn, asking about opportunities in Austin's technology sector. She's apparently looking for consulting opportunities or board positions with startup companies, Jennifer explained with obvious discomfort. She mentioned that she has experience with marketing technology companies and strategic restructuring. The irony was almost too perfect to believe. The woman who had used her board position to eliminate my department was now seeking opportunities in the very industry sector that her decisions had helped me enter. Patricia's attack on my career had inadvertently forced me to build expertise and relationships that were now more valuable than anything she could offer to potential employers. I didn't respond to Patricia's outreach, nor did I interfere with her efforts to find new opportunities. The most powerful response to her attack had been the success of Chen Analytics and the failure of her strategic recommendations at Horizon. Anything else would have been unnecessary and diminishing to the professional reputation I had worked to establish. September marked the second anniversary of Chen Analytics, and we celebrated by announcing our expansion into European markets and the opening of our second office in San Francisco. Elena had been promoted to Chief Operating Officer, and we had hired 37 employees who were developing business intelligence solutions for clients across multiple industries. The company that had started as a response to professional betrayal had evolved into something that transcended its origins. We weren't just providing analytics services. We were helping companies understand complex market dynamics and make strategic decisions based on comprehensive data analysis rather than traditional assumptions. Standing in our Austin headquarters on the anniversary of our founding, I pulled Patricia's check from my desk drawer where I had kept it as a reminder of how dramatically circumstances could change. $500 for 2 years of innovation had become the symbolic foundation for a company worth over $20 million. But the real transformation wasn't financial. It was the realization that I had spent too many years trying to prove my worth to people who had already decided not to see it. Building Chen Analytics had taught me that the most powerful response to being underestimated wasn't arguing for recognition. It was creating something undeniable. I endorsed Patricia's check and deposited it into the Chen Analytics account, not because we needed the money, but because I wanted that transaction to appear on our financial records. $500 from Patricia Richardson, received September 15th, invested in the future of a company she had inadvertently created through her attempt to destroy my career. The woman who had told me I wasn't good enough for her family had been absolutely right, though not in the way she intended. I wasn't good enough for the kind of family that used power to diminish others rather than elevate them. I was better than that, and Chen Analytics was proof of exactly what someone could accomplish when they stopped seeking approval from people who were incapable of recognizing value. Patricia Richardson had wanted to demonstrate her power by eliminating something I had built. Instead, she had demonstrated my power by forcing me to build something she could never touch. The attack that was supposed to end my career had become the catalyst for beginning it. The boardroom had grown quiet after Patricia's presentation, that particular kind of silence that follows devastating revelations. I could hear the soft hum of the air conditioning system and the distant sounds of downtown Austin traffic filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The morning light that had seemed so promising when I arrived now felt harsh and unforgiving, casting sharp shadows across the polished mahogany table where my professional future was being dissected like a failed business case study. Patricia sat with the composed satisfaction of someone who had executed a plan flawlessly. Her hands were folded neatly on the table, her posture perfect, her expression professionally neutral in the way that powerful people master when they're delivering life-changing news. She had transformed from investor to executioner with seamless efficiency, wielding her financial leverage like a surgical instrument designed to eliminate precisely what she intended to destroy. Bob Walsh looked like he was still processing what had just happened. As CEO, he had undoubtedly participated in difficult personnel decisions before. But this was different. This wasn't about poor performance or budget constraints or strategic realignment in response to market conditions. This was about the systematic elimination of Horizon's most successful innovation, justified through carefully manipulated financial analysis that obscured rather than illuminated the true value proposition my department represented. Linda Foster was gathering her materials with the kind of distracted efficiency that suggested she was already mentally calculating the operational implications of Patricia's proposal. As COO, Linda understood better than anyone how interconnected our various departments had become, how the digital innovation hub's insights and capabilities had elevated performance across multiple client accounts. The restructuring Patricia was proposing would do more than eliminate my team. It would fundamentally alter Horizon's competitive position in ways that might not be immediately apparent, but would certainly be strategically devastating. Mark Stevens remained focused on his laptop screen, his expression suggesting he was running calculations that didn't align with Patricia's projections. As CFO, Mark had access to the same financial data that Patricia had used to build her case, but his understanding of our revenue attribution models and cost allocation methodologies gave him insights that contradicted her conclusions. The tension between his analytical integrity and the political reality of challenging a major investor was visible in the way he kept reviewing numbers that weren't changing no matter how many times he examined them. Patricia reached into her leather portfolio with the deliberate precision of someone who had planned every element of this moment. Her movements were unhurried, almost ceremonial, as if she understood that what she was about to do would be remembered long after the specific words of her presentation had been forgotten. She withdrew a checkbook that was clearly expensive, the kind of leather-bound, gold-embossed accessory that wealthy people use to demonstrate their status even in routine financial transactions. The sound of her pen moving across the check was unnaturally loud in the quiet boardroom. Each stroke seemed intentional, deliberate, as if she was signing something far more significant than a simple payment. I watched her write with the kind of fascinated horror that people experience while witnessing car accidents, unable to look away even though they know they're watching something terrible unfold. When she finished writing, Patricia tore the check from the book with a crisp sound that seemed to punctuate the entire morning's proceedings. She held it for a moment, examining her handwriting as if confirming that she had captured exactly the message she intended to convey. Then she slid it across the polished mahogany surface toward me, with the kind of casual gesture that suggested she was completing a routine business transaction rather than delivering a calculated insult. I looked down at the check and felt the world shift slightly around me. $500. Made out to Sarah Chen in Patricia's flowing script, signed with the kind of authoritative flourish that suggested she considered this gesture both generous and appropriate. $500 for conceiving, developing, and implementing the Market Pulse platform that had revolutionized Horizon's competitive capabilities. $500 for building a team that had generated over $8 million in new business revenue. $500 for transforming a regional marketing agency into a technology-forward industry leader. The amount was so inadequate, so disconnected from any reasonable assessment of my contributions, that it transcended mere financial miscalculation and became something else entirely, a deliberate demonstration of exactly how Patricia valued my professional existence. This wasn't an oversight, or a budgeting error, or even a cost-cutting measure. This was a message, delivered with the precision of someone who understood exactly how demeaning gestures could be used to assert dominance and establish hierarchies. Patricia's voice, when she finally spoke, carried the tone of someone offering comfort to a disappointed child. Sarah, I want you to know that this decision isn't a reflection of your personal capabilities or your dedication to Horizon's success. You've worked extremely hard, and that effort deserves recognition. The word effort landed like a physical blow. Not results, not innovation, not strategic impact effort. As if my contribution had been measured by hours logged, rather than outcomes achieved. By good intentions, rather than transformational results. Patricia was reducing 2 years of industry-leading innovation to the kind of participation trophy that organizations give to employees who try hard but don't quite measure up to professional standards. The restructuring we're implementing will create new opportunities for talented individuals like yourself, Patricia continued, her tone maintaining that carefully modulated sympathy that made her words feel even more condescending. Sometimes organizational changes force us to reconsider our assumptions about optimal career paths. Bob was shaking his head slowly, the kind of gesture that suggested he was watching something he knew was wrong but felt powerless to prevent. Patricia, I think we need to consider the full implications of what we're discussing. Sarah's department has been central to our recent success, and I'm concerned about the client reaction to these changes. Patricia's smile didn't waver, but there was something in her eyes that suggested Bob's objection was more of an inconvenience than a serious challenge to her authority. Bob, I appreciate your loyalty to existing personnel, but effective leadership sometimes requires making difficult decisions that prioritize long-term organizational health over short-term comfort. The phrase existing personnel was particularly telling. Patricia was positioning me as a legacy issue rather than a strategic asset, something inherited from previous management, that needed to be addressed rather than preserved. She was reframing my departure not as a loss of valuable capabilities, but as an optimization of resource allocation, a necessary step in Horizon's evolution toward more efficient operations. Linda Foster attempted one more intervention, her voice carrying the kind of diplomatic urgency that suggested she understood the broader implications of what was happening. Patricia, I think we should also consider the message this sends to our other employees. The Digital Innovation Hub has been seen as a model for the kind of strategic thinking we want to encourage across all departments. Patricia's response revealed the depth of her preparation and the extent to which she had anticipated every possible objection. Linda, that's exactly why this restructuring is so important. We can't allow one department to become a special case that operates under different standards than the rest of the organization. Integration and consistency are essential for sustainable growth. She was using the language of organizational development to justify what was fundamentally a personal attack, wrapping her vendetta in business school terminology that made it sound like strategic planning rather than calculated revenge. The sophistication of her approach was almost admirable. She had identified legitimate organizational challenges and crafted solutions that addressed those challenges while simultaneously achieving her personal objectives. Mark Stevens finally looked up from his laptop screen, his expression carrying the kind of professional frustration that accountants experience when they're forced to work with numbers that don't accurately represent underlying realities. Patricia, I need to formally note that the cost-benefit analysis you've presented uses allocation methodologies that may not reflect the actual economic contribution of the Digital Innovation Hub. Patricia's response was swift and decisive, delivered with the kind of authority that comes from controlling significant financial resources. Mark, I appreciate your attention to detail, but we can't allow perfectionist accounting practices to prevent necessary strategic decisions. Sometimes leadership requires acting on available information rather than waiting for ideal datasets. She was dismissing Mark's professional expertise, while simultaneously positioning herself as the decisive leader who was willing to make tough choices that others were too cautious or too attached to existing arrangements to implement. The political dynamics were clear. Patricia's investment gave her leverage that transcended the normal organizational hierarchy, allowing her to override professional objections through sheer financial authority. I realized that everyone in that room understood exactly what was happening, but they were trapped by the same power dynamics that had made Patricia's attack possible in the first place. Bob needed her investment to maintain Horizon's growth trajectory. Linda required her support to implement operational changes across multiple departments. Mark depended on her confidence to maintain his position as CFO. They could object to her methods, but they couldn't challenge her fundamental authority without risking their own professional positions. The check sat on the table between us like a physical manifestation of everything wrong with the situation. $500 wasn't just inadequate compensation. It was an insult carefully calibrated to maximize psychological impact while maintaining plausible deniability. Patricia could claim she was being generous by providing any recognition at all for a departing employee. Anyone who objected to the amount could be dismissed as ungrateful or unrealistic about standard severance practices. But I understood that the check represented something far more sophisticated than simple financial stinginess. This was Patricia Richardson demonstrating that she could take someone who had generated millions of dollars in value for an organization and reduce them to a $500 transaction. She was showing everyone in that room that talent, innovation, and strategic impact meant nothing when confronted with sufficient financial leverage and political maneuvering. The humiliation was designed to be complete and public. Patricia hadn't simply eliminated my department through a confidential board decision. She had orchestrated a formal presentation that documented my insignificance in front of everyone who mattered to my professional reputation. The check wasn't just payment. It was evidence that could be referenced whenever anyone questioned the wisdom of her decisions. I looked around the table at my colleagues, people who had witnessed my work, who had seen the results my team delivered month after month, who understood the strategic value of what we had built together. Their expressions showed a combination of sympathy, frustration, and helplessness that confirmed my growing understanding of how completely Patricia had outmaneuvered everyone involved. The morning light streaming through those floor-to-ceiling windows now felt like stage lighting illuminating a performance that had been choreographed months in advance. Patricia's presentation, her financial analysis, her prepared resolution, her checkbook. Everything had been planned with the kind of meticulous attention to detail that suggested she had been working toward this moment since the day she learned about Michael's and my broken engagement. I folded the check carefully and placed it in my blazer pocket, next to my grandmother's pearl earrings that I had worn for luck. The contrast was almost poetic. Jewelry that represented family legacy and professional achievement, paired with a payment that represented dismissal and devaluation. Patricia had intended the check to be the final word in our professional relationship, but as I felt it settle next to those pearls, I realized it was actually the beginning of something she couldn't possibly understand. "Thank you, Patricia," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil I was feeling internally. "I appreciate the recognition, and I'm committed to ensuring a smooth transition that protects our client relationships and preserves the value we've created." My diplomatic response seemed to satisfy her expectation of gracious acceptance. Patricia gathered her materials with the efficient satisfaction of someone who had accomplished exactly what she had set out to achieve. The meeting was concluding on her terms, with her authority established and my compliance secured through a combination of financial leverage and professional courtesy. But as I watched her organize her leather portfolio, I felt something shifting inside me that Patricia would never have anticipated. The humiliation she had so carefully orchestrated was transforming into something else entirely, a clarity about exactly what I was dealing with and exactly what I needed to do about it. Patricia Richardson had spent months planning the perfect demonstration of her power over my career. She had eliminated my department, dismissed my contributions, and reduced my value to a $500 gesture that was intended to leave me feeling small, defeated, and professionally irrelevant. What she didn't understand was that she had just handed me the seed money for the company that would eventually make her restructuring proposal completely meaningless. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.